Armitage. Lesson 7, Prenatal Influences. The term prenatal, of course, means before birth, and prenatal influences are those influences exerted upon the child before its birth into the world. The students of eugenics are vitally interested in the subject of prenatal influences, as they recognize that therein is to be found the secret of much which will work along the line of better offspring and general race betterment. Prenatal influences, as the term is used in the present consideration of the subject, may be considered as manifesting in three phases as follows. 1. The influence of the physical, mental, and moral family characteristics of the parents transmitted to the child along the lines of heredity. 2. The influence of the acquired personal characteristics of the parents, particularly the acquired characteristics which are especially active at and just previous to the time of actual conception, transmitted to the child along the lines of heredity. 3. The influence of maternal impressions after conception and during the period of gestation or pregnancy, transmitted to the child physiologically and psychologically. I shall now ask you to proceed with me to a consideration of the various phases of prenatal influences coming under the above-named three general classes and the principal factors involved therein. Heredity in general. By heredity is meant the tendency which there is in each animal or plant in all essential characters to resemble its parents, or the hereditary transmission of physical or psychical characteristics of parents to their offspring. There is a great disagreement among the authorities as to how far the principle of heredity really extends, and the real causes of heredity are in dispute. In the present consideration we shall, of course, pass over the technical phases of the subject, and shall touch only upon the general features and principles involved. Shute, in his work entitled Organic Evolution, says that an offspring always inherits from its parents many of their characteristics is well known. That it always varies more or less from them is also equally well known. Heredity and variation are twin forces that play upon every creature, holding it rigidly true to the parental type or compelling more or less divergence therefrom, according to the strength of the one or other power, so that every creature is the resultant of the activities of these two great parallel forces. Variation is coextensive with heredity, and every living creature gives evidence of the existence of variations. Mental heredity can be illustrated by studying the genealogies of such persons as Aristotle, Goethe, Darwin, Coleridge, Milton, etc. Probably the Bach family of Germany supply one of the best illustrations of the inheritance of intellectual character that we know of. The record of this family begins in 1550, lasting through 8 generations to 1800. For about 2 centuries it gave to the world musicians and singers of high rank. The founder was Weitbach, a baker of Presburg, who sought recreation from his routine work in song and music. For nearly 200 years, his descendants, who were very numerous in Franconia, Thuringia, and Saxony, retained a musical talent, being all church singers and organists. When the members of the family had become very numerous and widely separated from one another, they decided to meet at a stated place once a year. Often more than 100 persons, men, women and children, bearing the name of Bach, were thus brought together. The family reunion continued until nearly the middle of the 18th century. In this family of musicians, 29 became eminent. Inheritance of moral character is well known. Heredity in its relation to crime and pauperism has been thoroughly investigated by Mr. Dugdale in his most instructive little work entitled The Dukes. In this work, the descendants of one vicious and neglected girl are traced through a large number of generations. It reveals that a large proportion of the descendants of this woman became licentious. For in the course of 6 generations, 52% of the children were illegitimate. It shows also that there were 7 times more paupers among the women than among the average women of the state, and 9 times more paupers among the male descendants than among the average men of the state. The inheritance of physical peculiarities is so obvious as to need no illustration. Among the ancients, the Romans stereotyped its truth by the use of such expressions as the labiones, or thick-lipped, the nasones, or big-nosed, the capitones, or big-headed, and the buccones, or swollen-cheeked, etc. In more recent times, we read of the Austrian lip and the Bourbon nose. But in all considerations of the subject of heredity, one must always remember that the inheritance of physical, mental and moral characteristics is not alone from the immediate parents, but rather from many ancestors further removed in order and time. Back of each person there is a long line of paternal and maternal ancestors, extending back to the beginning of the race. And in that line there are influences for good and evil, awaiting favourable environment for awakening into new life, unless restrained by the will of the individual. As Shute says, there will come a time when the fertilized ovum will have a highly complex nucleus composed of many different ancestral groups of hereditary units. One often hears the expression that a child is a chip of the old block. But this is only a very partial truth, for the child is preeminently a composite chip of many old blocks. And Luther Burbank has well said, "Heredity means much, but what is heredity? Not some hideous ancestral spectre forever crossing the path of a human being. Heredity is simply the sum of all the environments of all past generations on the responsive, ever-moving life forces." Transmission of acquired characteristics. One of the great disputes of biology is that concerning the question of whether or not parents may transmit to their offspring their personal acquired characteristics, as well as those inherited from their line of ancestors. One side of the controversy points to the observed cases of children and grandchildren resembling each other physically, mentally, and morally in acquired characteristics, but the other side explains these facts as due to environment rather than to heredity. The best authorities seem to favour a middle view, holding that acquired characteristics may be and are transmitted as tendencies in the offspring. Thus, as each succeeding generation manifests the acquired tendency, it adds a cumulative force to the family heredity. At the same time, they hold that environment is needed to draw out the inherited tendency. For instance, a child born with evil tendencies and placed in an evil environment will most likely manifest evil conduct. The same child, if placed in a good environment, will not have the evil tendencies drawn out by the environment and will probably not manifest evil conduct. The same rule applies to the child drawn with good tendencies. In short, it is held that heredity and environment tend to balance each other. The something within is called out or not called out by the something without. The life of the individual is held to be a continuous action and reaction between heredity and environment, and both of these elements must be taken into consideration when we think of the subject. Shute says, as influencing a man's life and character, which is the strongest factor, heredity or environment? In our opinion, as a result of long study and reading, where we have an average man of a sound mind in a sound body, their environment will be the strongest factor, whether for good or evil. That is, in men in general, who have no organic defect, such as insanity or idiocy and allied affections, the stronger force is environment. But in those having such defect, heredity is the controlling power, and we may add, the destroying power. The eugenic rule regarding heredity. It is one of the cardinal principles of eugenics that those with a bad family history should not become parents. By this it is not meant that the manifestation of undesirable tendencies, physical, mental and moral, on the part of certain individuals of a family necessarily constitutes a bad family history. On the contrary, many of the best families have from time to time individuals who manifest undesirable tendencies and who are in general out of harmony with the general family standard. It is an old axiom that there is a black sheep in every flock, and the flock must be measured by its general standard and not by its exceptional black sheep. A bad family history is one in which the family has clearly manifested certain undesirable physical, mental, and moral traits in a marked degree and in a sufficient number of instances to establish a standard. Some families have a bad family history for inebriety, others for epilepsy, others for licentiousness, others for dishonesty, the history extending over several generations and including a marked number of individuals in each generation. Individuals of such a family should refrain from bearing children, and if children be born to such, the greatest care should be exercised by the parents in the matter of surrounding the child with the environment least calculated to draw out the undesirable characteristic. The child has a right to be well born and to be protected from being brought into the world subjected to the handicap of a bad family history. If individuals cannot endow their children with a good family history, they should refrain from bearing children. Such is the eugenic advice on the subject. The same rule applies to the question of acquired characteristics of the parents, especially those acquired characteristics which are especially active at or just before the time of the contemplated conception. Though the family history of both husband and wife be ever so good, it is held that if one or both of the parents have acquired undesirable and transmissible characteristics, physical, mental, or moral, then the question of bringing children into the world should be carefully considered and conscientiously decided, after competent authorities have been consulted concerning the case. The prospective child should always be given the benefit of the doubt in such cases. To bring children into the world merely to gratify personal pleasure or pride, regardless of the welfare of the child, is something utterly unworthy of an intelligent and moral human being. Fitness for parenthood. In determining the fitness for parenthood on the part of husband and wife, the mental, physical and moral qualities should all be taken into consideration. Weak or abnormal mentality, chronic immorality or perverted moral sense, or diseased or abnormal physical conditions, these should always be regarded as bars to parenthood. To violate this principle is to deliberately violate the fundamental laws of nature, as well as those principles which are accepted as representing the best thought and customs of the race. A mental, moral or physical pervert or defective is manifestly an unfit considered as a prospective parent. Parenthood on the part of such individuals is not only a crime against society, but always a base injustice perpetrated upon the offspring. A very interesting phase of the general subject now before us for consideration is that which touches upon the effect of those particular acquired characteristics which are especially active at the time or just before the time of conception. The best authorities hold that the influences manifest and active in the prospective father and mother during the period immediately preceding conception will have a marked effect upon the character of the child. The following quotations from authorities on the subject will serve to illustrate this idea. Riddell says, "The transient physical, mental and moral conditions of the parents prior to the initial of life at the time of inception do affect offspring." Dr. Cowan says, "Through the rightly directed wills of the mother and father, preceding and during antenatal life, the child's form of body, character of mind, and purity of soul are formed and established. That in its plastic shape during antenatal life, like clay in the hand of the potter, it can be moulded into absolutely any form of body and soul the parents may knowingly desire." Newton says, "Numerous facts indicate that offspring may be affected and their tendencies shaped by a great variety of influences, among which moods and influences more or less permanent may be included." Riddell says, "The influence of environmental conditions and prenatal training are ever evident. Colts from dams that have been under regular training are faster than those from the same mother foaled before she had been trained. The puppies of the trained shepherd dog learn much more rapidly than do those from the untrained animal. No sportsman would think of paying a high price for a puppy the mother of which was stupid and untrained. The same law applies, only with greater effect, to the human family." Greer says, "No married couple will desire, design and love a baby into existence without the first requisite, good physical health." Grant Allen says, "To prepare ourselves for the duties of maternity and paternity by making ourselves as vigorous and healthful as we can be is a duty we owe to children unborn." Holbrook says, "It is essential, therefore, that if children are to be well born, the parents should be careful that at the moment of procreation they are fitted for the performance of so serious an act." Another authority says, "Generation should be preceded by regeneration." Cowan says, "In the conception of a new life, the mass of mankind observes no law unless it be the law of chance. Out of the licentious or incontinent actions of a husband's nature, conception after a time is discovered to take place. No preparation of body, mind, or soul is made by either parent. not more than one child in perhaps 10,000 is brought into the world with the consent and loving desire of its parents. The other 9,999 children are endowed with the accumulated sins of the parents. Is it any wonder that there is so much sin, sickness, drunkenness, suffering, licentiousness, murder, suicide, and premature death, and so little of purity, chastity, success, goodness, happiness, and long life in the world? Preparation for parenthood. The ancient Greeks attached great importance to the mental, moral, and physical condition of the parents at the moment of conception and for a period preceding the same. The investigations of modern scientists have tended to corroborate the facts upon which the ancient theories were based. Modern science teaches that the life cells of each parent are impressed with the condition of the respective parents and retain this impression until they meet and finally coalesce and combine, the combined cell then receiving the result of the original impressions. The best authorities on the subject claim that a reasonable time of self-restraint and continence should be observed by the prospective parents before the conception of the child. This contention is borne out by the experience of the breeders of fine horses and cattle, who have discovered that the best offspring are produced when the animals have been restrained from sexual intercourse for a reasonable time. This precaution being particularly observed in the case of the male parent animal. Writers on the subject cite a number of instances to prove that this law maintains in human as well as in animal life. It is claimed that Sir Isaac Newton was conceived after a period of over a year of total sexual abstinence on the part of his parents. Many other celebrated men are said to have been conceived after an absence from home on the part of the father, or a temporary absence from home on the part of the mother. Many physicians are able to cite many similar cases observed in the course of their own experience. The prospective parents should endeavour to bring themselves up to a high degree of physical health and well-being. The blood of the mother should be enriched by proper nutrition, and the organs of the body should be brought to a state of normal functioning along the lines of digestion, assimilation, and elimination. The minds of both parents should be exercised by reading the right kind of books, and by paying attention to natural objects of interest. A little change of scene will tend to awaken the powers of observation and attention. Riddell says, "If the prospective parents will habitually exercise the reasoning faculties and inventive powers, usually the offspring will have a fair degree of inventive talent and originality, even where these qualities are originally deficient in the parents. When there is a considerable natural talent, or where there are latent inventive powers, constant training on the part of the parents will usually give the offspring exceptional powers in this direction." The prospective parents should also develop and exercise their moral faculties in the period preceding conception. This course will tend to reproduce the same quality in the child. The reverse of this, alas, is also true. A case is cited of a man who procreated a child while plotting a nefarious crime, and the child in afterlife manifested a tendency toward theft, roguery, and rascality, even at a very early age. The lack of moral fibre so often noticed in the sons of rich men who have attained their success through questionable methods is perhaps as much attributable to these preconceptual influences as to the spoiling environment of the child after birth. In the period of physical, mental and moral preparation for parenthood, the leading thought of both parents should be, do we wish our child to be like this? This thought, if carried as an ideal, will act both in the direction of self-restraint and self-development. The actual time of the conception of the new life should be carefully chosen, so that it may occur under the best circumstances and conditions. The suggestions embodied in the preceding paragraphs should have been carefully observed, and the time chosen should be one in which a peaceful and happy state of mind is possessed by both parents. The ovum of the woman is believed to have its greatest vitality about the time of the close of each menstrual period, and many good authorities hold that this is not only the natural period for sexual intercourse, but is also the exact period in which the life forces in the ovum are strongest, and that consequently the child conceived at this period is likely to be stronger and more vigorous than the one conceived at a later time between the menstrual periods. Dr. Stahl says, medical authorities attach great importance to the mental condition at the moment of conjunction and conception. It is quite universally believed that this is a moment of unparalleled importance to the welfare of the future being. It is an awful crime to beget life carelessly, and when in improper and unworthy mental states. Some people seem to think that the matter of begetting a child, like the matter of selecting a wife, should be left wholly to blind chance. Neither of these two important events can be too much safeguarded by wise and thoughtful consideration. If conception is permitted to take place when either one or both of the parents are in bad health, if the wife is an unwilling mother, and the embryo is developed by her while her whole nature rebels against the admission into the family of a child who is not wanted, the children begotten and born under such circumstances can never be other than sickly, nervous, and fretful during their entire childhood, and cross and uncompanionable throughout their whole lives. Much of the differences which exist between children of the same parents may be easily attributed to the different bodily and mental conditions of the parents at the period of conjunction, the changed physical, intellectual, and emotional states of the parents at the different periods of conception, producing the corresponding differences in their offspring. The results of purposed and prepared parenthood are so great and so desirable that a husband and wife should consider these matters carefully, making preparations, and approach the period when they would beget offspring and bring immortal beings into the world with the greatest thoughtfulness, consideration, and also with prayer. Dr. Hoofland says, "In my opinion, it is of the utmost importance that the moment of conception should be confined to a period when the sensation of collected powers, ardent passion, and a mind cheerful and free from care invite to it on both sides." Riddell says, "The law of initial impressions is well established. It has been understood and applied by stock raisers for centuries. Experiments prove that the qualities most highly excited in animals prior to their union are most fully transmitted. The speed of horses and the acquired characters of the dog have been improved by the applications of the law. History and classic literature contain many references that recognize its importance, like Shakespeare's, 'Come on, ye cowards, ye were got in fear.' Ancient laws forbade union while parents were intoxicated, because such unions resulted in the production of drunkards and monstrosities. The asylums for the feeble-minded contain hundreds of unfortunate ones that are the product of such unions. The law of initial impressions, like the other laws of heredity, is traced most easily where morbid conditions are transmitted, but fortunately it is quite as potential in the production of desirable qualities. Unusual excitement to the social, intellectual, or religious powers on the parents just prior to the inception of the new life frequently produce in the child corresponding tendencies. Dr. Stockham says, many a drunkard owes his lifelong appetite for alcohol to the fact that the inception of his life could be traced to a night of dissipation on the part of his father. Fleming says, not only do drunkards transmit to their descendants tendency toward insanity and crime, but even habitually sober parents, who at the moment of conception are in a temporary state of drunkenness, beget children who are epileptic or paralytic, idiotic or insane, very often microcephalic, or with remarkable weakness of mind, which is transformed at the first favourable occasion into insanity. The time of conception should undoubtedly be chosen to correspond to a time in which the sex powers of both parents are at their maximum. This is arrived at by a reasonable period of previous continence and abstinence from sexual relations between the married couple, and by an observance of the natural law which renders the woman most strong sexually at the close of the menstrual period. The husband, as well as the wife, is most strong sexually at this period, as under normal conditions his sex power is most actively called forth by that of the woman at this period. At this period the wave of sex power is at its height, and this is the best time for the beginning of the new life. As Riddell says, strong, vigorous, chaste sexuality at the time of conception is of supreme importance. It is indispensable to good results. No number of other conditions or factors can be so favourable as to justify the creation of a new life when the vitality of either parent is low. Parents transmit their physical constitution, intellect and morals only to the extent of the sex power at the time of inception. It is needless to say that there should exist between the prospective parents a strong bond of affection and attraction. By an irony of civilized life, the term love child is applied only to the offspring of unmarried lovers, men and women whose affection or passion have run away with their judgment, and who have loved not wisely but too well. Some of the world's greatest men and women have been love children of this kind, and in such cases it is probably true that their physical and mental strength has been the result of the ardent feeling animating the parents at the moment of conception. Such children seldom result from the tired bed or worn-out passion, love killed by sexual excesses, indifference on the part of one of the participants of the union, duty, intercourse without affection or passion, or forced sexual relations. Every child should be a love child in the true sense of the term. The term should be one of respect, not of reproach. There should be no children but love children. The fruit of the perfect mating and marriage should be the perfect love child, and it would always be so if husbands and wives would but observe the laws of the normal natural sex life. And last of all, and perhaps more important than all, is the fact that at the moment of conception the minds and hearts of both of the prospective parents should be united in a strong love and desire for the hoped-for child. At that moment their best natures should blend into each other, and their love for each other fuse into a new love, the love of the child of the union. Under such circumstances, in such act, the cosmic forces flow unhindered through the beings of the parents, and the new life is begun under the approving smile of nature. Maternal impressions. One of the oldest and most firmly rooted beliefs of the race is that which holds that the pregnant mother may, and often does, consciously or unconsciously impress upon her unborn child certain mental, moral, or physical traits. The majority of persons accept this idea as self-evident and are able to cite cases within their own personal experience which go to prove the correctness of the popular belief. But certain modern authorities have sought to tear down this belief and to discredit the general idea. Let us briefly consider both sides of this question. On the side of the generally accepted belief, Riddell says, "The more I study the influence of maternal impressions upon the life, mentality and character of men, the more I am led to believe that the education and moral training that a child receives before it sees the light of day are the most influential, and therefore the most important part of its education." Newton says, "A mother may, during the period of gestation, exercise some influence by her own voluntary mental and physical action, either unwittingly or purposely, in determining the traits and tendencies of her offspring." This is now a common belief among intelligent people. Every observant teacher could doubtless bear witness to the same general facts, and it would be easy to fill a volume with testimonials from various sources, illustrative and confirmatory of the law under discussion. Such facts establish beyond question the conviction that the mother has it largely in her power to confer on her child such a tendency of mind and conformation of brain as shall not only facilitate the acquisition of knowledge in any specific direction, but make it certain that such knowledge will be sought and acquired. Dr. Fordyce Baker says, "The weight of authority must be conceded to be in favour of the idea that maternal impressions may affect the growth, form and character of a forming child." Dr. Rokitansky says, "The question whether mental emotions do influence the development of the child must be answered yes." Dr. Britton says, "The singular effects produced on the unborn child by the sudden mental emotions of the mother are remarkable examples of a kind of electrotyping on the sensitive surface of living forms. It is doubtless true that the mind's action in such cases may increase or diminish the molecular deposits in the several portions of the system. The precise place which each separate particle assumes may be determined by the influence of thought or feeling. If, for example, there exists in the mother any unusual tendency of the vital forces to the brain at the critical period, there will be a similar cerebral development and activity in the offspring." Newton says, "The human embryo is formed and developed in all its parts, even to the minutest detail, by and through the action of the vital, mental and spiritual forces of the mother, which forces act in and through the corresponding portions of her own organism. And while this process may go on unconsciously, or without the mother's voluntary participation or direction, yet she may consciously and purposely so direct her activities as, with a good degree of certainty, to accomplish specifically desired ends in determining the traits and qualities of her offspring." Professor Bayer says, "The influence of the mind of a prospective mother upon her child before its birth is of tremendous importance to its active existence as a member of society, from the fact that it lies in the mother's power to shape its mentality, that it may be a power for good or for evil. The views of that school of thought, which is opposed to this old and generally accepted idea of material impressions, are ably presented by Dr. Salibi as follows. Consider the case. The baby is at this time already a baby, though rather small and uncanny, floating in a fluid of its own manufacture. Its sole connection with the mother is by means of its umbilical cord. That is to say, blood vessels, arterial and venous. There is no nervous connection whatever, absolutely nothing but the blood stream, carried along a system of tubes. This blood is the child's blood, which it sends forth from itself along the umbilical cord to a special organ, the placenta or afterbirth, half made of itself and half made of the mother, in which the child's blood travels in thin vessels so close to the mother's blood that their contents can be interchanged. Yet the two streams never mix. The child's blood, having disposed of its carbonic acid and waste products to the mother's blood, and having received therefrom oxygen and food, returns so laden to the child. Pray, how is the mother's reading of history to make the child a historian? We see now how the learning of geometry on the part of the mother before its birth will not set her baby upon that royal road to geometry of which Euclid rightly denied the existence, any more than after its birth. Such a thing does not happen unless we are to call in telepathy. All this argument may seem quite convincing at first, but when we begin to consider the matter carefully, we begin to perceive the weak places in the argument as above presented. In the first place, it is known that emotions powerfully affect the condition, quality, and life of the blood. We know that cheerful emotions impart certain uplifting qualities to the blood, while depressing emotions correspondingly react upon it. Fear, worry, fright, jealousy, etc. are actual poisons to the blood, and have brought on diseased conditions to the persons manifesting these emotions. Moreover, it is known that impaired quality of the blood reacts upon the brain. Is it so unreasonable, then, to hold that emotional states in the mother may react upon the mental and physical condition of the unborn child through the blood? Does not something similar occur in the case of the babe after its birth, when it is affected by the conditions of its mother's milk, brought on by her depressing emotions, fright, etc.? This would seem to explain at least the matter of emotional reactions between mother and unborn babe. But the case is not closed with the presentation of the evidence of physiology, important though that may be. There is an entirely different field of science to be drawn upon before the case is closed. The orthodox physiologist makes the mistake of supposing that all mental impulses and transmission of psychic energy require the service of nerves as channels of transmission. While such channels are usually required, we have good reasons for believing that there are exceptions to the rule. There have been found tiny creatures possessing life and energy, performing the functions of nourishment, elimination, and even of reproduction, and yet without a nervous system. In one well-known instance, that of the moneron, we find not only an absence of a nervous system, but also the lack of organs of any kind, and yet the creature lives, acts, moves, eats, thinks, and reproduces itself. Then again, consider the moving cells of the blood, unconnected with the brain, unattached to the nervous system, and yet rushing to the work of repairing a wound, or of repelling an intruding germ, in obedience to a mental command from the controlling subconscious mental regions of the living creature. How does the mental impulse reach these cells and others of similar nature in the system? If we were not so sure of the facts, might we not feel inclined to say with Dr. Salibi in the above quoted sentence, "Such a thing does not happen unless we are to call in telepathy"? Moreover, examining Dr. Salibi's statement, we see mention made of the placenta as being half made by the embryo and half made by the mother. How does this cooperation and coordination of effort and subconscious will arise? How does the subconscious mentality of the embryo know that the subconscious mentality of the mother is making its half of the placenta, or vice versa? Again, how is the subconscious mentality of the mother affected by the presence and development of the child? How do her mammary glands respond to the growth and development of the child? In short, how is the manifest cooperation and coordination between the nature of the mother and the nature of the child possible, unless there exists some psychical as well as some physical relation between the two beings? The person conscientiously considering this subject must include in his thought the discoveries of modern psychology concerning what is known as the subconscious mind, which controls the unconscious and instinctive functions of the physical body, and also receives impressions and suggestions from the surface consciousness of its owner. This factor being admitted to our thought on the subject, we may find it possible to accept the idea of material impressions from mother to child operating from the subconscious mind of the mother to that of the child. In other words, that there is a subconscious mental connection as well as the physical connection between the mother and her unborn child. Many careful thinkers and observers find it just as easy to accept the fact of this strange, sympathetic coordination between a mother and her unborn child as it is to accept the very frequent sympathetic sickness of the husband during the pregnancy of his wife, or of the sympathetic labor pains so often experienced by the husband during the confinement of his wife. Both of the latter two cases occur too often to permit the phenomenon to be denied offhand by those who would set aside all facts not agreeing with their particular personal theories. There is no nervous system connecting husband and wife, and of such cases the critic, like Dr. Salibi, might say, "Such a thing does not happen unless we call in telepathy." The fact remains that many things actually happen which, according to the orthodox physiological theories, cannot happen, but they do happen nevertheless, whether we call it telepathy or merely label it certain facts, the exact causes of which science, in the present state of its knowledge or ignorance, cannot definitely determine. One irrefutable fact outweighs a ton of mere general denials of possibility. It is recorded that the mother of Charles Kingsley believed in maternal impressions, and during her period of pregnancy exercised her imagination and emotions in the direction of wishing and imagining that the coming child should have the same love of Devonshire scenery that so delighted her. The result proved her theory, for though Kingsley never saw Devonshire until he was a man of 30 years of age, every Devonshire scene had a mysterious charm for him throughout his entire life. It is said that Robert Burns was so strongly impressed parentally by the old Scotch songs and ballads that his mother sung during her pregnancy, that his whole nature longed to express itself in like measure and substance. He always believed that his poetic spirit was kindled by this tendency on the part of his mother during the period preceding his birth. The mother of Napoleon Bonaparte during several months of her pregnancy, accompanied her husband during his military campaigns in Corsica, and during the entire term she lived in an atmosphere of battles, military strategy, and troops. When the boy was very young, he manifested an unusual interest in war and conquest, and his whole mind had the military bent, although his brothers were in no wise remarkable in this direction. The artist, Flaxman, stated that his mother had related to him how for several months prior to his birth she had spent many hours each day studying drawings and engravings, and endeavouring to visualize by memory the beautiful figures of the human body drawn by the masters. The result was that from early childhood Flaxman manifested an intense delight in drawing, and in after life his drawings were regarded as masterpieces. He and his mother always attributed his talent to the parental impressions above mentioned. Buffalo Bill was believed to owe his characteristics to the mental states of his mother, the family living in Missouri during the days of frontier fights and disturbances, the mother being called upon several times to exercise resourceful courage and fortitude. A well-known worker along the lines of liberal Christianity is said to have attributed his tendencies in that direction to the prayers of his mother during her pregnancy, that the child might be true to the teachings of the Christ and should be a laborer in the cause of human brotherhood. This man, relating the fact, said, "I may have been converted before I was born." A well-known writer along the lines of moral philosophy is believed by friends to owe his talent to the earnest thoughts and hopes of his mother during pregnancy. She is said to have pictured the child as a son destined to become a great moral philosopher, her mind being so firmly fixed on this fact that she felt it was already an assured fact. The Greeks were wont to surround the pregnant women with beautiful statuary, and it is recorded that in many cases the children afterward born closely resembled these works of art and beauty. It is claimed that many Italian women closely resemble the face shown in Raphael's Madonna, copies of this celebrated picture being quite common in Italian households. Frances Willard, the temperance worker, is said to have very closely resembled a young woman of whom her mother was very fond. Many family resemblances are believed to have risen in this way, rather than by heredity. Zira Colburn, the mathematical prodigy whose feats astounded the scientific world in the early part of the last century, is said to have derived his wonderful faculty from maternal impressions of this kind. His mother is said to have occupied much of her time during her pregnancy in studying arithmetic and working problems, the study being quite new to her and proving very interesting. Cases similar to those above quoted might be duplicated almost indefinitely. The story is practically the same in each and every case. The principle involved is always that the pregnant mother took a decided interest in certain subjects, studies, and work, and that the child, when born, manifested at an early age similar tastes and inclinations. But far more important to the average prospective parent is the fact that many authorities positively claim that any pregnant mother may consciously and deliberately influence and shape the character, physical, mental, and moral of her unborn child. Newton well says on this subject, "In the cases usually given to the public bearing on this topic, the moulding power appears to have been exercised merely by accident or chance, that is, without any intelligent purpose on the part of mothers to produce the results. Can there be any doubt that similar means, if purposely and wisely adopted, and applied with the greater care and precision which enlightened intentions secure, would produce under the same law even more perfect results?" Is it not altogether probable that an intentional direction of the vital or mental forces to any particular portion of the brain will cause a development and activity in the corresponding portion of the brain of the offspring? There seems to be no reasonable ground on which these propositions can be denied. The brain is made up of congeries of organs, which are the organs of distinct faculties of the mind or soul. It follows, then, that if the mother during gestation maintains a special activity of any one brain organ or group of organs in her brain, she thereby causes more development of the corresponding organ or group in the brain of the fetus. She thus determines a tendency in the child to special activity of the faculties, of which such organs are the instruments. It is plain, furthermore, that if any one organ or faculty may thus be cultivated before birth, and its activity enhanced for life, so may any other, and so may all. It would seem, then, clearly within the bounds of possibility that a mother, by pursuing a systematic and comprehensive method, may give a well-rounded and harmoniously developed organism to her child, notwithstanding her own defects, which, under the unguided operation of hereditary law, are likely to be repeated in her offspring. Or it is within her power to impart a leading tendency in any specific direction that she may deem desirable for a life of the highest usefulness. In this way, ancestral defects and undesirable hereditary traits of whatever nature, or however strong, may be overcome, or in a good degree counterbalanced, by giving greater activity to counteracting tendencies. And in this way, too, it would appear the coveted gifts of genius may be conferred. In other words, it would seem to be within the mother's power, by the voluntary and intelligent direction of her own forces in orderly and systematic methods, both to mould the physical form to lines of beauty and shape the mental, moral, and spiritual features of her child to an extent to which no limit can be assigned. I think that in the pages of this particular part of the book, the prospective parent may find hints and general directions toward a clearly defined ideal, which is carefully studied, and as carefully put into practice will produce results far beyond the dreams of the average man and woman. The hope is a magnificent one, and the best testimony is in favor of the possibility of its actual realization. End of Lesson 7.